The offshore wind that comes down the estuary, that is an offshore wind when it hits the sea, is something that I harness. But when it gets to the sea, it could be potentially dangerous. And that's because here, when the wind blows down the estuary, I end up on land because there's some land at the end. But at the sea, when the wind carries on blowing, it just takes me further and further offshore into Lyme Bay. And then I'm at the mercy of the sea, the currents and the temperature. In the UK annually, we are seeing 80% of the assists that the RNLI does in these areas been as a result of people not understanding the implication of going out in offshore winds. Now, although the RNLI statistics don't cover that any wind that blows away from the shore in a big body of water is not going to be beneficial to you either getting home or getting home efficiently or make you feel safe and under control. And that's particularly true if you're not well practiced at SUP, you don't have the requisite fitness and knowledge. So today, I've decided I'm going to illustrate this by paddling an area I know really well, and then hopefully give you some tools to understand what kind of ability you need to have to handle being on the sea or in any big body of water with the wind blowing away from your landing point or from your exit point. So how do you tell what an offshore wind looks like? Down at the beach there are often indicators such as flags. You'll see here on the day of my travel, the flags are definitely blowing, pointing out to sea. The lifeguards lead signs. You may also use your local weather forecast to show whether the wind is offshore, or as in this case, the arrows indicate onshore wind. When the wind's blowing onshore, the flags will look like this. Other ways you can find out what the wind's doing is to measure it using an anemometer. Hold it in the air. And it's recording winds at 2.8, 5.2, 6, 7 kilometres. Right, so I'm beachside. I've set my watch ready to go. Let's have a look and see what the wind is saying. So I'm only probably now 50, 60 metres down the beach. And if I turn the correct way, the wind is still giving us 7 to 8 kilometres per hour. The reason the wind is so low, despite the forecast being so high, is because of the effect of the wind coming over the cliffs. Well, the first thing I notice is now I've hit a little wind line as I come offshore. And I'm only offshore 50, 60 metres and I can feel the wind on my left shoulder. And what that's doing is driving me towards the channel, but also towards those waves. So if I was a beginner, I'd helplessly now be heading towards those waves. And I'm just going to record the wind at this point 50 metres offshore for you. My GPS says I'm doing 3.7 kilometres an hour now. And I am actually being driven that way. And the wind says 6.7, 6.8, 8.2, and you can see the swell here coming from my left. And it's taking me straight over this area here, which is fine. So on this particular day, on this particular flow, with a base wind of 8 kilometers an hour, I'm been taken without paddling straight over into these waves just here. Now, they're not big, they're not dangerous, but if you've never been on a board before, you feel that you're not in control, which you're not, but also you're going to end up on the reef. okay? And the wind's kicking up now, so I'm just going to paddle so I miss the reef. It's my local beach, so I know it well. I won't want to be on that reef because at some point it dries. And this is right in front of the lifeboat station, right there. I'm being blown along at 3.8 kilometers an hour towards the opposite beach of Dawlish, which is about 4.5–5k away on the Warren, depending on where you land. I'm not paddling, I'm just using the paddle to steady myself, so you can see the effect of the wind. So it's taken me now past my point, past the break, and I'm heading into the open channel.
I'm driving down an empty freeway, no waiting for the light to change. I'm seeing the sunrise behind me.
So at the moment, my average speed, and I've travelled 15 minutes because I talked for 2, is 3.6, and the wind speed is between 12 to 15 kilometers an hour, a light force 3. Now I've decided not to stop whilst I'm talking, so what I've done now is from the 1k mark for 500 meters, I'm going to kneel and see how much that reduces my speed. So that's my 500 kilometer meter mark, which basically means that I've got a segment then, and I've been on my knees now. So now I'm going to stand up, but before I do, having hit 150, my average speed hasn't changed, but what I noticed is about 1.3 kilometers out from the shore, which happened during that kneeling section, if I put the anemometer up, it was recording 18 and 20 kilometers an hour, which is much more like the forecast.
Is this all that you dreamed it'd be? Ending up here, ending up with me. You could have gone anywhere, been anyone. You stole my heart like a thief on the run. You're not much for taking chances, but you've taken a chance on me. And now we're building bridges as far as the eye can see.
Okay, so here we are. My average speed is 3.4 and it's taken me 34 minutes and 56 seconds, which was probably less a couple of minutes where I stopped. So let's say it's taken me 32 minutes to do 2 kilometers. That's 16 minutes a kilometer. So in an hour, I'm roughly traveling 4 kilometers, so that makes sense. So I'm just going to save that, and I'm just going to start another one, which is going to be a 500 meter just on my knees. But before I do, I'm going to turn around and show you exactly where I am now from where I came. Or as I like to say, whence I came. Okay, so that doesn't sound a lot, 2 kilometers, does it? No, and it's not a lot. But on the sea, it's an awful lot. So for example, kneeling now, I don't think anyone on that shore can see me 2 kilometers out. I think they probably lost sight of me at about 1,500 kilometers, even stood up with a red suit and bright orange jacket on. I don't think they see me. I think on the next shore, they're probably seeing me coming. But on where I left from, and there is my departure point, there.
It's hard to make out the individual buildings. I can still make them out, but I've come 2 kilometers. I'm at 330 meters. I'm traveling at 2.2 kilometers an hour, and I'm in the middle of the bay. If you're not used to this, I think you'd be feeling fairly vulnerable. So I'm probably going to just undo my phone now and just mount it on the front of my board. For the journey back, I'm going to let you see me in time lapse. It's not a pretty sight, but hey, I'm going to let you see me in time lapse because I know what's going to happen is when I turn around in about 150 meters, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to paddle hard. And all this time the wind's been on my back. I've not noticed it because I'm going with it. But when you turn around and you go into the wind, it feels twice as hard. And I think that psychological factor, when you are drifting offshore with those winds, I think that psychological factor, unless you're used to it, is something that may cause you distress and may cause you to panic, particularly if you've got young children with you or people, you know, like your loved ones that you care for, but you know you don't have the experience to look after. It's very difficult with your loved ones. Believe me, I know. I've taken them on the water, you know. I've been through the mill with them. So what I like to do is get to a point where I can paddle back, and I'm going to end the kneeling journey on the 500, and then immediately when I turn on the camera, I will have turned the board around and I'll be paddling back, and I'll measure my journey back. So in theory, I should be roughly 2.5 kilometers from my start point. We'll see from the journey back. I'll take a direct route back to where I came from. Thanks for watching. So it took 33 minutes to get back here. It's about the same time it took to get out. So once again, the wind deceives us. And the wind effect is bigger than perhaps you appreciate, either on the beach or until you turn around and paddle back, and then you get the idea of what that wind effect is. Now, I didn't travel any faster back than I went out, although I was slightly faster at periods. I would normally, for that kind of distance, maintain 6 to 8 kilometers an hour. I was sort of maintaining 4.5 to 5.5, 6, depending on the sea state. And the sea state made a lot of difference. Now I know that. I know coming back, I had one wobble when I was falling asleep and wasn't paying attention, and I nearly, well, I went into my waist because of my PFD. But for some people, going in those conditions make it impossible for them to get back on their board. The essence of this journey is be careful when you go to a big water area, whether that's lake, estuary, loch or sea, maybe a couple of rivers. We're ignoring those at the moment because they're flow-based, where the wind may be a factor that you do not expect to take you where it's going to take you, either at the start of your journey, in the middle of it, or even at the end of it. In the evening here, the sea breeze can turn from going this way to going that way in a northwesterly. And the northwesterly means you go out to sea. At least in northeasterly, I went over to other land. Okay, so just be aware of the wind, particularly offshore winds. And the best way to work that out is to look at the forecast, ask the locals, paddle out 100 meters, turn around, come back and feel the wind on your face. You can choose your beach then to get a more suitable wind direction for your beach if you're coming from a distance. But again, if you're coming from a distance, you don't know those local variables. Okay. The tide today, it's a neap tide. That means it doesn't have a big differential. And the thing about a neap tide is there's not a lot of tidal flow, but there is some swell. Yeah, this is really interesting. So when we used to kite surf, we learned some rules, and basically the rules are about disturbed wind. So when the wind goes over an object, it's disturbed downwind of that object. So if the object's 100 feet high, the wind is disturbed downwind for 10 times that, 1,000 feet, and back against itself for 2 to 3 times that distance, so 200 or 300 feet. So as soon as you go offshore, for 1,000 meters, the wind is not affected, is affected and is not fully functioning as it is before it hits that object. So if it comes over a cliff, there's a void underneath the cliff, and the wind doesn't put itself into its full directional force until further out to sea, which is why you don't see offshore winds until they're further out to sea. Ah yeah, the paddle, so 2.5k, that would normally take me about 20 minutes. Today it took me nearly 35, so that was a substantial proportion. I'll do the maths on that later and let you know. So I did 500, I did 500, I did 500. I did one of those on my knee, but we averaged 3.6, I seem to recall. And I did a final 500 just to see what the knee difference was. And we were definitely, slower at around 2.5 kilometers an hour. I haven't evaluated what happens in the water, but I know when I sat down to talk to you the first 500 meters, I used about 2.5 minutes, and I didn't go very far because I could see that visually I was near the buoy. Okay. See, the problem is a lot of people think they're visible. They're not visible, even when they wear red and yellow like this. What makes them visible is the electronics or the safety systems, the whistle. All of these things help us be visible on the water, and they're standard kit for people like me. So I'd urge you to start investing in some of that kit to make yourself visible. By all means, use the default phone in a sack, but I would encourage you to look at a cheap 30 quid push button rather than your smartphone on a £10 every 120 days deal just to make emergency calls. The most important electronics for you to have in your pocket is a PLB. They're 200 quid, and if you think that you've spent £250 on Tesco's on your board, then it's going to seem like a lot of money. I didn't, and I wouldn't. But a PLB to me is the most useful item. It's the kind of thing I give to my son when he goes cycling. It's the kind of thing I know that whatever else fails, whether it's this or that or this or this, the PLB, pushing it, will bring some help. You've got to keep it up high, and we'll discuss that in another video. But for the moment, I would like to thank you for listening to me rant on my boring notes, and let me recap. So the purpose of today was to go down to the beach and show you what a nice, calm spring day looks like onshore and out to sea, and then the effect that the wind that I know is there because I've seen the forecast, but you can't feel on the beach, has on the board when you are stood up. The conclusion is, if you get caught in an offshore wind, kneel down. Even better, put your feet in the water or drag something behind you to slow you up. But in order for that to work, you've got to have a means of getting help. The best way for you to get help is to not need it. So predict what's happening, adjust your paddling accordingly, and don't go for huge long journeys where the wind may take you offshore. Hello. For most people, an offshore wind is going to be an inconvenience that's going to tire them out. But it's only going to be like that if you've paddled before. If you've never paddled before, see the offshore wind as your foe. It's something that you should respect, particularly when it takes you into sea states that you don't want to be in. Avoid offshore winds, have some great paddling this summer, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
I'm driving down an empty freeway. No waiting for the light to change. I'm seeing
sunrise behind